I do not think this is real.
Ugh. My head is killing me all of a sudden. The hell was that? Forget it. It was probably nothing. This depressing collection of blood, grit, and mental issues is Twisted Metal Black, the 5th game in the Twisted Metal franchise. After the series' declining popularity following Twisted Metal 3 and 4, the decision was made to return the rights back to its proper place with Single Track, now going under the name Incog Inc. With Jaffe and the others back in the reins, they set about finding a way to restore the series to its former prestige. Gameplay wasn't going to be enough. Just because they were working on the newly released PlayStation 2 didn't mean they would get away with another cookie-cutter entry. They needed something new, and what they came up with was dark. Or should I say black? No, I shouldn't. That was... I can't believe I wrote that. Twisted Metal Black's biggest change to the formula is its switch from over-the-top heavy metal insanity to a somber gray, psychological horror-type atmosphere. If you've looked around my channel before, I'm sure you understand how much I adore the dreary, unsettling themes of psychological horror. This new tone and direction resulted in a complete canon reset, with Twisted Metal Black being considered an alternate universe from Twisted Metal 1, 2, and Head On, which we haven't covered yet. They share similarities, and still do sort of tie into each other, but we'll talk about that in a bit. For the time being, just forget everything that happened in the first 4 games. The story is fundamentally the same, but all the details have changed. Twisted Metal is still a demolition derby tournament held by a man named Calypso. I worded it like that intentionally, as this man is not the same Calypso we're familiar with. This Calypso isn't so much a Joker-like devilish trickster as he is a smug, sadistic asshole. At least that's my assumption of his personality, because we never hear him speak. There's also no longer an explanation of who Calypso is or where his powers come from. He's now a bald man in a black coat with a scarred eye and no trace of his burnt face origin story. This actually kinda hurts me to say, but Calypso is the least interesting part of the game, which is weird because Calypso usually steals the show, hence the reason I named the series after him. We should move on to the other characters though, because there's a lot to talk about this time. Instead of sending emails to recruit his drivers, which is a weird detail that is 100% true I forgot to mention, Calypso now gathers his contestants from the Blackfield Insane Asylum in a city called Midtown. Now, you could always argue that the Twisted Metal characters were crazy, but every driver is now a literally insane, broken person who joins in the hope of repairing their fractured life, for better or worse. I actually want to look at all of the base characters this time, as each of them has a fleshed out story that delves into their past and their reason for entering the tournament. Almost every one would make a decent premise for a standalone horror movie, and like I said before, the story and world are my favorite part of Twisted Metal. This also lets me share the stories with my PAL region viewers for the first time, as, no joke, the entire story is removed from the European versions of the game. The cutscenes, the dialogue, the text, anything that discussed the plot in any way is completely missing from the PAL version of the game. Censorship was pretty nuts for games over there at the time, and that's just the worst. John Doe, the driver of Roadkill, is, true to his name, a blank slate. He looks like a skinhead and is covered in tattoos, but cannot remember anything about himself other than a vague connection to a crime syndicate. He enters Twisted Metal at Calypso's suggestion, hoping to find the answer to who he really is. Billy Ray Stillwell is the driver of Junkyard Dog, a country boy who used to be a corn farmer living a normal life with his wife Annie until one day, while he was checking the crops, an unscheduled duster flew right over his head and unloaded a cloud of toxic, corrosive chemicals directly onto Billy Ray. Eventually waking up after passing out from the intense pain, Billy Ray finds his face horribly disfigured and rushes home to seek his wife's help, only to find her in the arms of the pilot who just attacked him. The pilot escapes, but in a rage over her actions, Billy Ray murders his cheating wife with a hoe, a joke that I'm sure wasn't lost on the developers. Billy was arrested and sentenced to life in the Blackfield Asylum until Calypso showed up, promising him the chance to get back at the man who ruined everything for him. The preacher, Jebediah, is the driver of Brimstone. A man of God who was possessed by a demon whilst performing an exorcism on a newborn child, the preacher succumbed to the evil spirit inside him and brutally murdered everyone in his congregation. After being sentenced to life in Blackfield, Calypso promises the preacher a chance at the truth of what truly happened that day. Crazy 8 is driven by No Face, formerly Frank McCutcheon. No Face was a small-time boxer, never a championship contender, but still appreciated by fans for his determination and love of the sport, until one day he was put against a new opponent he severely underestimated. To put it simply, Frank got his shit kicked in, and was left seeking medical attention for a shattered jaw and other injuries. His friends recommended an unknown surgeon to him who was a fan of boxing. Unfortunately, the surgeon had bet quite a large sum on Frank and was infuriated with his loss. The doctor tore out Frank's eyes and tongue, then sewed the empty cavities shut before fleeing the scene. Driven to madness by the intense pain and isolation, No Face began to wildly lash out at anyone nearby until he was apprehended and sent to Blackfield, where he met Calypso, who promised to bring him the surgeon from that fateful day. This is a good time for me to point out that all the dialogue and cutscenes is presented via narration from your chosen driver. How No Face could possibly narrate anything to anyone is beyond me. Wait a second. How the fuck does he drive? Agent Stone is the owner of the police van Outlaw. Stone was a member of Midtown's SWAT team, working as a sniper during a raid on a crazy doomsday cult. When things started getting heated, Stone let his emotions get the best of him, and in a rage accidentally shot a woman and her daughter in a nearby apartment. The grief was too much to bear, and Agent Stone was brought to Blackfield. Calypso offers him a chance at redemption in exchange for his participation in Twisted Metal. The driver of Mr. Grimm is Mr. Grimm, an ex-soldier who served in the Vietnam War. He and his best friend Benny were captured by a Vietnamese advisor and tossed into a pit to die of starvation. The two screamed for help for days on end until the advisor returned and tossed Grimm a knife before telling him if he wanted to survive, he'd have to eat whatever he could find in the hole. Grimm was horrified by his implication, but when Benny finally passed 2 days later due to his injuries, Mr. Grimm found himself with no choice. He thinks Benny would have understood. Grimm was found weeks later by a group of American soldiers, wearing the skull of his deceased friend as a macabre sort of helmet. When the GIs attempted to take it off him, Grimm lashed out and killed 4 of them before being detained. Trapped in Blackfield Asylum for 30 years, all Grimm wishes from Calypso is to find the man who turned him into a monster. Spectre is a white Corvette whose driver, Bloody Mary, is obsessed with the fantasy of a fairy tale wedding. She wants nothing more than to be walked down the aisle by her Prince Charming, but due to her less than stable mental condition, she never found any luck in this search of hers. One day, while attending her friend Kristen's wedding as a bridesmaid, Mary hadn't been taking her bipolar medication, and her inability to find a suitable man made her snap. She grabbed the large knife used to cut the wedding cake and stabbed Kristen to death before dragging her body into a back room and taking the blood-soaked dress for herself. Needless to say, she was eventually arrested and sent to Blackfield. Calypso offers Mary the perfect man in exchange for her joining Twisted Metal. The somehow edgiest car in the edgiest Twisted Metal game is Shadow, driven by a goth girl named Raven. Raven and her friend Kelly were your typical introverted outcasts who kept to themselves despite being bullied on a regular basis. While the two were hanging out at the Midtown Pier, a group of boys from their high school showed up and started harassing them, ending with them forcefully throwing Kelly into the sea. Raven yelled at them, telling them that Kelly didn't know how to swim, but the boys ignored her and fled the scene. Raven, with no one around and unable to swim herself, had no choice but to watch her friend drown in horror. Raven was blamed for her friend's death, which led to her imprisonment in Blackfield Asylum. Obviously, Calypso offers her the chance to avenge Kelly's death. Dollface is the unfortunate soul driving the massive semi Darkside. Dollface was a college student from a broken family who eventually found herself working for a mask maker named Mr. Creel. After accidentally spilling coffee on a pile of documents, Dollface was attacked by Mr. Creel, who forced a full-head porcelain mask onto her, nailing it together to a skull-crushing tightness and locking it with a unique key. Probably a bit of an overreaction, but it used to make more sense once upon a time. We're not talking about that till Chapter 6, though. So for now, just roll with random employer destroying his new intern's life for a coffee spill. Dollface, through some unseen means, ends up in Blackfield until Calypso presents to her the key that will remove her mask, though she can only obtain it if she wins the Twisted Metal tournament. Next up is the man himself, the twisted driver of Sweet Tooth, Needles Kane. This is the first appearance of the Sweet Tooth design most people are familiar with, a large shirtless man with polka dot overalls and a distorted clown mask, all topped off with a scalp covered in perpetual fire. Needles was always disturbed, but in Twisted Metal Black he's a full-blown serial killer that revels in human misery. His only desire is to endlessly kill as many people as he wants, if only the searing pain of the flames on his head weren't distracting him so much. Needles was arrested by the police at some point and sentenced to death by electrocution. Just as the switch was thrown, the preacher, yes, the same one, casts a curse upon him, to bear the fires of hell for all eternity. Needless to say, the chair didn't exactly work out as planned. but the curse certainly did. Needles was somehow apprehended and forced into Blackfield. That is, until Calypso told him he had a way to make the flames go away. Needles is skeptical and couldn't care less about Calypso's stupid contest, but it's an excuse to kill people, and hell, it just might work. He can always kill Calypso later. There are a few unlockable characters that have shorter, less detailed stories, but I'm only going to be mentioning one more. Minion. Piloted by someone. Minion is still a large armored tank, but inside is no longer the demon who shares the same name. It appears to be a human man, wearing a hollowed out bull's head. All that's known about him is that he won the previous Twisted Metal tournament. Other than that, he's a total mystery. With all of that finally out of the way, we can talk about the actual game now. Despite all its changes in style and tone, Twisted Metal Black is still Twisted Metal at its core. You select a driver from the myriad of freaks I just talked about, each with their own unique stats and special weapon. Your objective is to destroy every other competitor using a variety of missiles, mines, and guns to eventually get your wish from Calypso. Sounds pretty standard so far. The biggest change I have to address is the game's shift to the PlayStation 2. This alleviates quite a few problems that were present in the first 4 games, most notably the choppy frame rate and visuals that had a habit of glitching or downright disappearing. The game now runs at a consistent 60 frames per second, and the visuals, while bleak and dull, are pretty nice for PlayStation 2 standards, if a little bland. This game world definitely has a strong sense of atmosphere. The whole game just feels hopeless and oppressive. I don't mean that as a negative, this sort of stuff is totally my speed. Though it is something you should know about before playing the game, this thing is rated M for a reason, and I have no doubt some younger players, or people more mentally susceptible to this sort of tone, shouldn't be playing this in the dark alone for long periods of time. All the depressing awfulness might get to you. Don't sacrifice your mental health for a video game, friends. But if you're here, I assume you, like me, enjoy and appreciate the world building. A perfect complement to the oppressive atmosphere, for better or worse, is the insane difficulty. Black is easily the hardest Twisted Metal game, and I've never really heard anyone disagree. The challenge isn't up to one specific issue, and is rather the culmination of numerous tweaks to the game design. Being from the original developers, the game speed is back up to Twisted Metal 2 standards. Sort of. Have you ever watched a video in 30 FPS, then seen it in 60 FPS, and it made the video seem like it was sped up, despite the fact it was running at the normal speed? That's what seems to be happening with Twisted Metal Black. The game, in practice, only seems to run at the same speed, if not a little faster than Twisted Metal 2. But due to the 60 frames per second, it looks like the game is jacked up on blast processing. This game feels crazy fast when you play it, and I'm sure by now you've heard me mention the problems present with hitting moving targets while in a moving vehicle. This forces you to acclimate yourself to the game even more than before, and gives the AI an even larger advantage in the control department over you. Speaking of AI advantage, after being changed in Twisted Metal 3 and 4, the computer opponents are now back to basically ignoring each other. But, of course, they kept the fact that the computer seeks health pickups, so now we have the worst of both worlds. Speaking of healing, it's basically been reverted to the Twisted Metal 1 style, that being these electric healing stations sprinkled throughout the map. They can only be used twice, and by that I mean twice between all of them. For example, if you use a healing station once, then use a separate healing station once, you have now exhausted all of your heals for that stage. The health pickup still exists, but they are few in number, take ages to respawn, and heal you for an honestly insulting amount, so no point in relying on these things. They're definitely an emergency last resort. The maps themselves vary greatly in size, from holy shit, where am I supposed to go, to holy shit, give me somewhere to go. Some of these levels are super teeny tiny, while others are absolutely gigantic multi-part monstrosities. It's quite impressive, actually. The huge maps with their myriad of secrets and unlockables can make for an enjoyable experience. The opposite side of the coin is an issue, though. There's a rather large problem exclusive to the smaller maps. Unlike other Twisted Metal games, Black doesn't really adjust the number of opponents relative to the map size. This means you end up in a microscopic map like Drive-In, and being forced to deal with 7 other drivers all at once. It's kind of a disaster. Most maps are large enough that you can use a hit-and-run strategy when you're low on health, but then there's god-awful maps like the Turnpike, Snow Road, whatever this nightmare was called, that are not only very small, but also full of harsh choke points, and a cliff along one side that will send you to instant death. I guess that's something I haven't talked about before, but it's been in all the other games as well. Twisted Metal's huge recurring issue is the unwieldy controls brought on by having to control a car in what is essentially an arena fighting game. It's not a feature many grow to love, but rather a handicap you learn to tolerate because everything else is fun. But for some unfathomable goddamn reason, they keep making levels surrounded by bottomless pits. These levels all suck in single player because it's an extra obstacle for you, but not for any of your adversaries, because obviously the AI is not going to accidentally slide off a ledge and kill itself. It just results in you avoiding certain sections of the map to avoid the danger, because the AI has no qualms about ramming you right the fuck off. We still got the 3-life restart cycle though, so the game is once again beatable. It's not fucking Takeshi's Challenge or anything. But victory is only in your reach after spending a while learning which vehicle suits your playstyle, item locations, the special combo moves, map layouts, and enemy behaviors. This is not inherently a bad thing. There's nothing wrong with a game having a steep learning curve, though some of this stuff is not going to pass from me. I'm just saying this isn't a good pick up and play game. You will die many times on the first few stages, and by the time you've gotten good enough to get to the end, you're going to be sick of this junkyard, I assure you. To alleviate your pain and suffering, we have quite a few new weapons at our disposal this go around. We got the gas can, which replaces napalm and is just generally a better version of it, as you now have the ability to detonate the explosive at any point in its arc. Then there's the reticle, which you can use to lock on and fire a large swarm of missiles all at once. Or if locking on isn't your thing, you can use the Zoomy missile, which is a rapid chain of 10 missiles that fire straight ahead and will completely wreck any opponent who gets hit by all of them. The special energy attacks return once again: freeze shot, shield, mines, invisibility, and jump. The only thing I have to say about these is that the computer players seem to have finally cooled their jets on spamming these endlessly. The previous games, especially 2, featured AI that had freeze shots for days, and it got very old very quickly, so I'm glad this was changed. But none of the weaponry compares to the all-time best strat for playing the story mode in Twisted Metal Black: the secret technique that turns the game from a challenging test to a trivial matter of time. Picking the car with the highest armor stat. I'm not kidding. I joked about this when I was talking about Twisted Metal 1, but I'm serious this time. This game kicked my ass until I just selected any of the huge armored vehicles. It occurred to me that the drivers are all balanced by their armor, speed, handling, and special stats. So a car with high armor has low speed and handling, and vice versa. However, the controls are janky no matter who you play as, so your handling stat doesn't matter, it's just how the game is coded. And the game is already really fast, so a slower car can actually be a good thing. This basically means you can pick the heaviest, strongest vehicles available and just be OP as fuck because there's no downside to counter your high armor and special stat. This probably won't work on human opponents, but it sure as hell works on the computer. I'm sure there are plenty of people who are Twisted Metal savants and can beat the game on hard with Mr. Grimm without restarting or some other amazing lunacy like that, but that ain't me, Chief. I'm here to tell you about Twisted Metal, not tell you how to play it, cause I suck. I like Twisted Metal, but it doesn't hold my attention long enough for me to get that good. Usually I beat the game with 1 or 2 drivers, and I'm done for a while. On the subject of being done, the final boss of Twisted Metal Black is Warhawk, a military chopper named after the game series of the same name, also made by Singletrack. Warhawk is unique in that you don't just unload ammo into him in various ways. Instead, you have to defeat these tanker enemies and then blow up their hollowed corpses while Warhawk is near them to lower his shield. You'll have to do this a handful of times while the chopper assaults you with very powerful barrages of gunfire and missiles. It's the most boss-feeling Twisted Metal boss so far, rather than just being a very strong normal competitor with a ton of health. When Warhawk is defeated, it's ending time once again. They're mostly presented just like the other cutscenes, 3D still images with pans and zooms, along with the occasional bit of animation. There's no dialogue in these endings, at least not in a conventional sense. Barring 2 or 3 lines, they're narrated by your selected character, which means no Calypso snarkiness, which is a loss, but the more complex stories kind of make up for it. Twisted Metal Black's darker tone means almost every character wishes for some sort of death or revenge, and Calypso apparently has no issue with granting those types of wishes, as his word-twisting game is very weak this time around. Barring Agent Stone and John Doe, whose wishes are innocent or helpful, so Calypso just fucking offs them. Twisted Metal Black is highly regarded as one of the definitive games of the PlayStation 2, and shares the spot with Twisted Metal 2 as the most off-cited favorite in the series. The gray and violent tone was exactly what people were looking for at the time, and the gameplay was just a more refined version of Twisted Metal 1 and 2 with better performance, though some would take issue with the lack of color and light that made many locations blend together. There was also an additional disc available post-launch that contained Twisted Metal Black Online, which is exactly what it sounds like. The multiplayer portion of the game, but with more players and web-enabled play. I didn't really mention it because online gaming was still very primitive back then, and I was like 8 at the time, so I never experienced the PlayStation 2's online offerings. It does seem that there's still some manner of community that managed to still play this despite the fact the servers are down. I'm not quite sure how that works, and I don't want to speak on a subject I'm uninformed about, so I'm just going to skim past this for now. Look up more if you're interested. I'll leave you with one more tidbit of story from Twisted Metal Black. What is, in my opinion, the coolest thing in the game. The last unlockable character is Minion, the only character with no cutscenes or ending of any kind, but that doesn't mean he has no story to tell. On the loading screens between each stage you can read the thoughts of the driver you're playing as, but for Minion you get this. If one converts these into English by assigning each number to its corresponding letter of the alphabet, you can find the following messages.
I do not think this is real. I must speak in code, or he will discover me. We are trapped in his head. This is how he sees the world, how Sweet Tooth sees his life. It's not real. All of us are trapped in his head. I miss the old, colorful world. We will return to our world one day. In the real world, my name is Marcus Kane.
Twisted Metal Black isn't an alternate universe at all. It's the distorted, miserable psyche of Needles Kane, of Sweet Tooth. It's how he sees reality, what the Twisted Metal tournaments look like through his eyes, through the tainted and darkened eyes of a cold-blooded murderer. Somehow his disgusting thoughts have caught the attention of the original Calypso, and this is where Black comes in. Black is a powerful humanoid figure in a gimp outfit that was brought into existence solely to kill Calypso. Cut content reveals that Black is an otherworldly demon under the real Calypso's control. Calypso sends him into Needle's mind to try and kill the other Calypso, for reasons we can only speculate on. It's unfortunate we'll never know exactly where this plot thread was going, as it seems really interesting. It was planned to be elaborated on in the Twisted Metal game that would come after this, but well, things don't always work out the way we hope.